Please subscribe and hit the like button.
Well, good evening. Welcome to Yada Yahweh Radio. We're here with both Kirk and JB. I heard that you came out of the deep freeze. We had a guest here night before last that lives in the Dallas area and said that the nightmare of the prior week was unbelievable because you lost electric power everywhere. Pipes therefore froze because you couldn't keep a home warm. Gas stations shut down. Supermarkets shut down. You were in the Stone Age.
Yeah, we were fortunate. Our power was rolling, so we'd have 20-minute periods off, and then it'd be on for about 45. But thankfully, our house was heated by a wood-burning stove most of the time, and I had plenty of wood, so we stayed pretty warm and cozy here.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it's amazing. The state of Texas.
Power coming on and off.
Yes, Texas has no reciprocity agreements with any other state, so you lose production capacity, and there you go. You're on your own.
Mm-hmm.
Jeez.
Yeah,
it was good. Yeah, I saw a lot of the neighborhoods coming together, people helping people out. There was a lot. At least where I was at, it was all good. So you had neighbors going door to door, coordinating, helping people get what they needed.
Okay. So sharing food because you couldn't go to the supermarkets because they, without any power, they can't run their registers or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, pretty
You
wild.
forget about that, don't you? You can't even get a McDonald's without a computer going. Wow.
No. Yeah. I know, and you can't run the kitchens or anything else, sanitation, you name it.
Several of the local grocery stores had a lot of meat go bad.
Yeah.
No refrigeration.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you wouldn't think that lack of refrigeration would be a problem when the temperatures are sub-zero, but nonetheless, I guess they could have been smart enough to take it outside. Oh, well.
Or brought some ice in the pack.
Yeah. So you heard that the U.S. intelligence community released their assessment of what happened to the Washington Post columnist Khashoggi, and lo and behold, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman approved the operation to kill him. No question about it. And yet this is a fellow that the United States enriches, and not only enriches, we sell some $100 billion worth of weapons to a year. We are exceedingly moral, aren't we?
We're sick.
Yep, and he is also the financier of mosques around the world. Most of the mosques that they sponsor preach fundamentalist Islam and therefore terrorism. So I think that's swell. We also had a conflict in the Capitol this week. I don't know if you're paying attention, but Dr. Rochelle Levin, she is a transgender nominee. Now, when transgender represents a infinitesimal fraction of 1% of the U.S. population, and they have enormous psychological problems. They have enormous health problems. I mean, it is darn near a death sentence to choose to deny your birth gender. And of all posts, Biden nominated her for Health and Human Services. Rand Paul was the only person with the courage to say, this just does not make any sense. But can you imagine? We've become so labelistic that to be considered kosher, you have to have cabinet members that are that represent not ability, not knowledge, not wisdom, not character, but certain number have to be women, certain number have to be men, certain number have to be black, certain number have to be Asian, certain number have to be transgender.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to create a new minority, so they have to give me a job.
Okay. What are you going to be? Well, I know what we can be.
I identify as furniture.
Be a czar of something. They get paid well.
I think we'll be We can't be Yahwehist because there is some cult out there that calls themselves Yahwehist.
Oh, jeez.
I just want to be a couple.
Let me follow his other way.
That's rare enough. Let's pick up where we one statement prior to where we left off last week. We left off last week on Bereshit, Genesis 3:17. Let's just go back to 3:16 since there was so much meat there. And rather than just pound poor Adam, we'll bring Yahowah back into the fray so we know what God had to say. God says, to the woman, he said, I will substantially increase. That would be a substantial increase because it's Rabbah. I will in magnitude, quantity, and time multiply your labor, your discomfort, your strenuous work. This is itzobon. Now, by labor, we're not talking about labor pains, as the English translations are wont to say. We're talking about strenuous, difficult work. Itzobon. And we know it's not labor pains, therefore birth pains, because the same word itzobon was used to describe the conditions that were going to be endured by Adam. And Adam, chances are, is not giving birth to children. That is not to say that itzobon was unrelated to children, because the next statement is heron ata. So this discomfort, this strenuous work, this physical sensation of stretching for a period of time while extending considerable energy and toil is an association with childbearing and rearing. Heron. Ata. Your pregnancy, the period of gestation, giving birth, addressing the intensification of pains and pleasures of sex, and of rearing children. With the physical sensations and hard work, you shall bear your children. What God is saying is that being a mother is going to be an extraordinarily difficult job. And if you're going to do it well, it is hard work, and a lot of it's going to be very frustrating and intense. So he's going to give women the most difficult job in the world, and it's because you made a decision that ended your lives. He is going to therefore make you responsible for bringing a new life into the world. Then he says, and towards your man, you will have strong emotional feelings. Boy, did I ever see this week. There was a young boy that my wife and I were trying to help, that both of his parents are involved in a Christian cult that is exceedingly mean, abusive to both boys and girls. That cult's called the family. Sometimes they refer to themselves as the Fellowship. It is an international organization that grew out of a cult that was originally in California, moved to Mexico, then to Texas, and now is in, I think, close to 100 countries worldwide. And little girls are in that cult are routinely raped, and the boys are essentially slaves. It is an exceedingly bad cult, and there's two parents on this island, both of which were allegedly out of it, but not, and they're exposing their children to it. So we made a genuine effort to try to save the children from them. What I got to see is just how much more emotional women are towards this sort of thing. I mean, I felt for the young man. I liked the young man. I spent a lot of time with the young man. I was willing to pick up the cost to raise the young man, both in time and money. So cared a lot for the young man. But I knew that it was unlikely that this was going to prevail because we needed one of the two parents to be sane. That was just not the case. I moved on. I said, okay, we tried. We could not prevail. So there's no reason to linger here. let's just move on. We have a responsibility, and there's lots to do, and that we need to be doing. And that seemed like a reasonable thing to do. Well, yeah, it is for a man, not so much for a woman. Her emotions are much more intense than our mind. And I think this is a reality that women are more emotional. I think they have to be to do the job of raising children. I mean, otherwise we would eat them, wouldn't we?
Mm-hmm.
Eating is probably a little, but
me and Patty have always said that's the complementary roles we play in raising a child.
Yes, it's thank God mothers love them, otherwise they might eat them. It is a necessary component. And when you think about how important it is for men and women to stay together and how challenging we men are to be around, it's exceedingly important that women are naturally loving. Otherwise, how would you keep the family unit together? So God said, towards your man, you're going to have strong emotional feelings. In addition, and this is what is very much misunderstood because the way this is written, it's in addition, wa, and then it's hu, mashal, ba'ata. Hu means he, mashal. The primary meaning of mashal is to communicate vividly using very descriptive terms, to communicate in such a way that you're educating both using concise language but also vivid examples. We use mashal to describe the Proverbs, where you're telling a story, you're painting a picture with words. And that's the primary meaning. The secondary meaning is to lead, to influence, to have some sense of control or governance is the secondary meaning. And I think the secondary meaning is derived from the primary meaning, which is if you can wield words wisely, then you can lead. You can lead in the most appropriate of all ways if you can wield words wisely. So that is the meaning of mashal. Ba means with. It does not mean over. Al is the Hebrew word for over. Ba means with. So with or beside or by. So let me read this to you now. It would say, in addition, he, from you, will provide mashal, wisdom, sharing narratives with symbolic meaning, such that he will be more in charge than you. So sharing symbolic meanings with you, mashal, the primary meaning, more in charge, secondary meaning, always
responsibility.
You. So he will be responsible for educating you. And he will use concise language, vivid examples, and valid quotes. And he will rule with you. He will speak of himself in comparison to you. Call stem, which means genuine literal interpretation, within the constraints of the relationship, and imperfect conjugation, which tells us this condition will be ongoing. And we talked about this last week. The English Bibles want to say rule over you, have dominion over you. Well, that changes ba from with and beside to over. And it is the extreme interpretation of the secondary meaning of mashal. When you think of Proverbs, which is the primary meaning of mashal, the last thing you think of, is having dominion, ruling over. Because every one of the Proverbs, they're all written the same way. Advice from the father regarding the mother told from the perspective of the son. So how do you get out of mashal, Proverbs? Dominion, rule, government, control. So you could say he would have influence over you, but the influence is from the primary meaning, which is teaching. And then you'd say, okay, so why would God do that? You explain why women need to be more emotional for their man. And there's twofold there. Of course, one is that their job is going to be to raise children. It's the hardest job in the world, and women are equipped to do it. Where us men, give me an example, a great example. When I realized we could not help this young man because we're not this boy's parents, we are not going to be able to take the boy away from his parents to save him. No. There's no way in the world that can be done that is legal. That I said, well, I've got something else to do today, and that is to translate and write. And I just sat down in my chair and had at it. And yet she said, how can you just do that? I'm still grieving over this. It's the difference between men and women. It's a good difference. But the other thing we talked about is that Adam. And by the way, one of the reasons that Towrah was in that position is that Towrah coveted. She had an emotional passion to be like God. She was jealous of God. She maybe was jealous even of God's relationship with Adam. So she coveted the idea of being like God. And so God said, well, I conceived you to have a passion for Adam. I didn't create you to have a passion to be a God. So, as a consequence of what you've done, I'm going to strengthen this emotional attachment that you're going to have to the man, the bond to the man, because that's where your passion needs to be for this relationship to work. You're not going to replace me. And if you abandon him, then that's bad for him and for me and for you. So I'm going to strengthen that relationship. And the second thing is that it's apparent to me, in translating this, that Adam did a really lousy job of educating Yahowah as it relates to the tree of the knowledge of good and bad. That's why she misquoted what God said. That's why she did not correct Satan when he misquoted God. And so, therefore, it was going to be Adam's responsibility to teach her, and it was her responsibility to learn from what he had to say. That's why the mashal is here. And that when those two things work in harmony, when the woman is exceedingly devoted to the difficult job of raising children, when she is bonded emotionally to her man as opposed to being desirous of replacing God, and when she becomes willing to learn from what her man has come to know, and that collectively they understand who God is and what he's offering and how they are to work together, that they will be able to be effective in ruling together, whether it's ruling over their families or governing the community that they live in, or just educating and guiding their children. So that was what Yahowah had to say to the woman. I think that there's not a part of that that's anything other than reassuring, reaffirming, and positive. That's not a there's no part of that that's a punishment. They're all good things.
It's only defining roles. I mean, this is what your strength is, so proceed on.
Yes, yeah. And keep in mind that in defining roles, the religious notion that is so prevalent in Judaism, Islam, and Christianity of men lording over women does not exist in this statement. There is no over, and to the degree that you even do translate mashal with a secondary connotation, it's to govern, to lead with one another, beside one another. So there is no dominion here. Then the next statement, to Adam, he said, because you have listened to the voice of your woman and have eaten from the tree for which for the benefit of the relationship and to get the most joy out of life, I instructed you, saying, do not make a habit of eating from it. The earth has become annoying, has been inflicted, injured, and harmed in this way because of you. You will labor, engaging in strenuous work. It's a bone, or if you prefer, you're going to have labor pains to eat of it all of the days of your life. All right, so here he's saying that and be careful. He's not saying you are going to have to toil now because you've listened to your woman or wife, if you want to translate Isha as wife. Its primary meaning is woman, female individual. It's Ish with the ah to feminize it. This is not saying husbands don't listen to your wife. I will tell you, being happily married here, that the decision not to listen to my wife would be very counterproductive. So God is not recommending that. But what he is saying is that you had a choice. You could listen to me. You could listen to Hasatan. You could listen to your wife. Your wife was the only other human. So she represents listening to humanity, to mankind, versus listening to God. So that's the lesson here. Because you've chosen to listen to your fellow man as opposed to me. If you want to have a harmonious relationship with Yahweh, you want to enjoy being part of the covenant, it is essential that you listen to God and hear what he has to say. So, because you have listened to your woman and have eaten from the tree, which Asher, which for the benefit of the relationship and to get the most joy out of life, Asher, which relationally to lead you along the narrow path of blessings. I directed, Shawa, I instructed, I directed, I communicated clearly and audibly to you, saying, do not make a habit. Don't consistently, continually consume food for it. Boy, it's important to know that almost all instructions of this kind, when Yahweh issues them, they're in the imperfect. He's not expecting perfection of us. All he wants us to do is, if we're doing behavior that is counter to the nature of his covenant, his instruction, it's just to stop doing it. Stop. Then you're fine. You know, that's the idea of the Christian, the first sin. You know, that mankind's initial sin is something that we have to be redeemed from. No. A child is born beautiful. There's not an ounce of evil in a child. There is nothing in a baby to redeem. They're lovely. Wonderful. We don't have to overcome initial sin, because the moment we're not engaged doing it, we're not guilty of it. And so no baby was born repeating the sins of their father or mother. They have to grow up a little bit before we get that corrupted. So it's written in the imperfect.
The other thing I love with the imperfect is, sometimes God's instructions, take for example, you should not make a habit of lying. That is a very good instruction. You should never lie. I'm sorry, if you were a German in Nazi Germany hiding a Jewish family and you lied to the Gestapo, that was a good thing to do.
Absolutely.
In that case, lying was appropriate.
Yes. I will tell you.
If you kill someone to stop them from killing your child, murder is appropriate.
Yes.
It's making a habit of it judges your character. Doing it one time does not judge your character.
Correct. That is absolutely true. And there are times when telling a lie is a good thing.
Yeah.
And you brought out a perfectly wonderful example of doing so. It takes tremendous courage and character to have told that lie under that circumstance. So he says now, so as a consequence, the earth, it's ha-Adamah. This is so interesting because Adamah is the feminine of Adam. So what he did, since Adam came from the Adamah, the earth, he's just saying, you're going right back to it. It's you've annoyed me. What you've done is annoying, even counterproductive to yourself. And so the very stuff that from which you were made is being affected by your choice. Or that you have taken yourself down a notch to the point now that rather than me taking you out of the elements of the earth, you've become part of it. You're just like every other animal now for a moment until you can figure out how to capitalize on the opportunity I have made for you to rekindle this relationship. You will labor, engaging in strenuous work to eat of it. Why? Because, listen, Yahweh says, I have all of these trees. You can eat from every single one of them. It's all wonderful. It's all healthy. It's all beautiful. All tastes great. It's all for you. I'm making it all available to you. You don't have to do anything. Just eat to your heart's content. He chose not to rely and trust Yahweh and ate of the tree that Yahweh instructed him not to eat from. And so what happens? Now, guess who's responsible to feed himself and his family? You can rely on Yahweh. You can rely on yourself. You can rely on your fellow man. Those are the three choices. Or I guess you can rely on a false god. There's only one of those that will prevail in the end. Yes. I mean, to a significant degree, being self-reliant, the mundane things in life is probably a good thing. But overall, in terms of God's instructions, we want to rely on what he has to say. So you're going to have to work now for your nourishment. And I even think that's symbolic, because I always look at the nourishment every time you see a call to consume as words, God's testimony. And so when he was just sitting there with Yahweh, and he could be with Yahweh anytime he wanted to, and Yahweh was educating him every day, the nourishment for growth came easily and directly to him and directly from God. But now, since he chose to consume both knowledge of good and bad, productive and counterproductive, he's going to have to work to filter through that which could be trusted and that which could not be, that which was reliable and that which is not reliable. Now, just learning and coming to understand would be work. And we do this every day. We have to work at the translations. We work at the insights. We work to share them.
Yeah, don't come easy now.
Right. And there will be a time where God's going to reinstall his operating system, his Torah, guidance inside of us, and that education is going to become prolific and vast and exceedingly easy again. And I will tell you, right now it's pleasurable, but it takes a lot of time. So that's God's assessment of him. Now, my favorite word, of course, is highlighted in this passage. I want to share that, and then I know, Kirk, you've got some things you want to share. Asher.
Yeah.
Asher. So much more than as it's initially defined as a relative pronoun. Asher is a noun, but it's also a verb. And as a verb, it speaks of advancing and making progress in a relationship by walking along a straight path, of being led the right way, of being blessed and happy as a result. I can't imagine a better word to describe the covenant. Advancing and making progress in a relationship by walking along a straight path and being led the right way, being blessed and happy as a result. To Asher is to speak well of someone and thereby elevate their position and status. It is to encourage and invoke prosperity, promoting benefits by teaching. Asher is to guide someone to live an upright life, leading them in the proper direction so that they derive the greatest meaning out of their existence. As a noun, moving from the verb, which is the most descriptive asset, as a noun, Asher conveys being happy, joyous, blessed, as a result of one's steps and the strides through life. This cheerful state is achieved by walking along the certain and correct path to be secure and free from harm. And as a proper noun, Asher was Jacob's son and the father of the tribe bearing his name. It's also interesting that Asher is used in conjunction with Shalom, which means instructions and directions, which had been offered to Adam directly by Yahowah, so that he would be Asher, properly guided in the relationship to get the most out of life. Now, one last thing is, before Kirk, I know you wanted to share on this.
Sure, go ahead. No.
Adamah, the earth. Now, as we've shared previously, it's the feminine form of Ha-Adam, the man. That distinction is particularly apropos here because Adam's poor decision was reversing the course of his life. The man who came from the Adamah is returning to it as a result of another person's influence. All right, Kirk, you wanted to share, and then we'll pick up, because there's more meat on this particular passage with what we've covered a lot of it, with Itzabon being hard work, and why Yahweh is not opposed to hard work. But go ahead.
Before I launch here, I was just thinking as you were saying all this, that I don't know if Asher's in the 5 terms and conditions, but it certainly describes 2 and 3, to trust and rely on Yahweh's promises and teaching and carefully consider terms and conditions, the mitzvah, in other words, benefits that Yahweh's offer.
It is.
Talk about being repetitive so you don't miss the point, even though we do. And then you have to walk away from Bible, and everything.
Asher is
instruction.
Asher is pervasive, and throughout the presentation of the 5 terms and conditions of the covenant, I don't think there's a single one of them that does not include Asher.
Yeah, I never thought of it till just now when I was saying, well, gosh, I never really, without going straight to it.
No, Asher is everywhere. There are places. There are places. What would you say, JB?
Between the 10 statements, it occurs 8 times.
Wow.
Okay.
That makes sense. Yeah.
It's predominant. And I will tell you that something in the range of about 90% of the time that Asher is used, you can effectively translate it as providing guidance regarding the proper path to walk to get the greatest benefit out of the relationship, which incorporates the majority of its primary meanings. And about 90% of the time, by translating it that way, the statement becomes more powerful, communicates more effectively. And it's about 10% of the time we're just translating it which or when or that or something of this nature seems adequate. So about 90% of the time, this is a word that is makes the statements that Yahweh is conveying much more dramatic, richer, appropriate, hugely more relational-oriented, and more instructive. And it is particularly true as God speaks of the 7 Moed Mikre, they're interwoven. It's particularly true as Yahweh presents the terms and conditions of the covenant, the benefits of the covenant. And Asher is the dominant word on the second day of creation, when the universe is expanding and God wants to speak to us relative to time. He's using Asher, relative, association, put the pieces together, understand my relative position in time compared to what how the conditions that you're reading this. It's, Asher speaks of relativity, and it is the dominant word throughout, the most repeated word throughout the second day of creation. Okay, Kirk, so that's your cue. I know you wanted to take off on Asher.
Okay, I missed my cue. As I was reading this about 3 weeks ago, there was 2 things that struck me. And I was thinking for kind of reflecting on everything, the last 13, 14 years, I think we've almost been 14 years, but at least I know at least 13 since I first read Yada Yahweh and via the radio, hearing you on the radio. Terry heard you on the radio first and then shared it with you. But those 13, 14 years, you constantly talked about Asher as your catalyst. And I kind of it got it ingrained in terms of association. I have association word, association this with that. But it was interesting here. You used it as and you've done it before. It just struck me a little stronger this time. Guides to an upright life, forward moving in a relationship, which I thought was, well, that's that goes right back to the 4th step of walking along the path provided, and the Moed, so the Moed Mikra. So, but I was stopped a while, and I started thinking about where we've come, and I thinking about the last 2.5 years and some of the things that it struck me, and how important the current work you're doing, the books and re-editing and rewriting, and these programs even are how important they are. And the events that led you to write Yada Yahweh all came from Asher. You had about 8 or 9 years ago, you referred to yourselves, because I was doing those programs with you during the week, as Yada, and in order to, I assumed in order to disassociate the man from the message, so it didn't become Craig Wentz said, as opposed to this is what Yahweh said. And so I picked up on that cue on the show, and we just started calling you Yada, 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 which I thought was terribly interesting. And that led to about 2.5 years ago, we started all that program, all that stuff, and there was a couple of verses I wanted to read that really tell where Yahweh tells us what this is all about. I know you've said it before, but I think it bears repeating. And the one that comes to mind first is the Chronicles 6:32.
Solomon's speech, the first Sermon on the Mount. The ultimate Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah. Well, it in that I went from 60 verse 2 all the way up to this one. But here's where it really takes off, and it says, if y'all may bear with me, it says, therefore, regarding someone else, the observant and discerning foreigner from a different ethnicity and geographic location, who will come to understand, the term is ha-nekri, who, to show the way of the benefits in the relationship, and there's the word Asher again, is not of your people, this Israel. He will come from a distant country in a distant time, and for the express purpose of being a witness and providing answers regarding your surprisingly important name, Yahweh. I mean, my gosh. You know, that was the one that launched me. I knew the phrase, I knew the verse you were talking about, but I always referred to that as, okay, he's just associating the sins onto the lamb, like the priest does. So I kind of would not have jumped on it the way you did. But Yahweh's name was Biggie. I mean, I spent hours and days and all on what it is, and by gosh, why don't I know it? And why they dismiss it so even after they tell you what it is, Yahowah.
Yeah, and I think, Kirk, JB, since you've done a lot of translating, once you've done a lot of it, one of the things that just resonates is there are 22 letters in this language, and 5 of those letters are vowels. And every single word can be pronounced using those consonants and vowels. And that Yahweh's name is comprised of 4 vowels. And none of those vowels are difficult to pronounce. And those vowels are used throughout all of the words of the language. And that if you were to take these 2 most recognizable Hebrew words, Shalom and Torah, between those 2 words, you have every vowel and every sound to pronounce Yahweh's name. And if you add to that, when Yahweh is telling Moshe, Moshe says, "Who is it that I should tell is your name? As I go to the children of Israel, they're going to ask me, what is his name? What shall I tell him?" And before Yahweh says, Yahweh's my name, that is the only name that I wish to be known as, before he makes that statement, he explains the basis of his name. Haya. But it's not just Haya, it's Ehaya. I am, I was, I am, I will be. Asher. Ehaya. So I am, for the benefit of the relationship and to show the way to walk to get the most out of life, I exist. Ehaya, Asher, Ehaya. But Haya itself, Hayah, well, there's the Yah, and there's the at the end. You only have 1 letter left. And what are the 2 most common Hebrew words? Torah and Shalom. Where does the O come from in Torah and Shalom?
Noah.
Allah. So how can this be so difficult?
It's the simplest thing in the world if you know any bit of Hebrew.
Correct.
You spend 20 minutes studying Hebrew, you're going to pick that up.
Well, no, people...
It's impossible not to because it's used in so many words.
No, you really have to want to know it. Listen, if you spent 20 minutes and your mind was open and you're looking for it, you will see it.
Yeah.
But most people will spend their lifetimes and never see it. So you have to really want to know. You have to be able to discard man's enormous amount of rubbish, where religious Jews will say that God's name is too sacred to pronounce. We don't want to pronounce it because we have too much respect for it. So we're going to call him Hashem, the name, or Adonai, the Lord, or some other absurd moniker. But his only one name is Yahweh, and if you are the least bit open about it, you can prove it. Now, I remember I spent 2 weeks where I went through the entirety of the Hebrew lexicon, every single word that had a yod, a hey, or a wah anywhere in the word, and I wrote them all down, every single one of them. And then I took probabilities of the percentage of the time that each of those letters were pronounced one way versus another way. And so I'm kind of ridiculous on some stuff. But I took 2 weeks. I wrote every single word down in the Hebrew lexicon and said, when you come to the end of it, okay, it's Yahweh. It's so enormously obvious. And what you end up doing, there are a few words which would indicate that the walk could be the U sound. And and rather than saying, well, I guess there's a possibility maybe it's 1% that is Yahowah as opposed to Yahweh, what you end up doing is saying, it's really not Yahowah, it's Yahodah, and it's that every time you see the Wah, it really should be the O sound, not the U sound. And so, and what you find is there's so many words that reinforcing that.
It's funny because right at that same time, and I didn't go nearly as in-depth as you did, but I had someone challenge me on how do you know it's Yahweh, which is what the name I was using at the time. And I'm like, okay, well, here. And I started, I didn't go nearly as in-depth as you did, but, I looked at the most common words. I was like, wait a minute, Yahweh's not quite right. It is Yahweh. And then, I think maybe 3 days later, you released a new update to something where you had changed it to Yahweh. And I'm like, and you had your whole explanation where you went into it. I'm like, oh, perfect.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah.
And we all had to recalibrate at that point.
Yes, it's reinforcing because that's where we're all going to come out. And the reason it was worth that much time is that Yahweh is really particular about his name. He gives it to us 7,000 times. He says that negation of his name is an unforgivable sin. The belittling of his name is an unforgivable sin. So, Yahweh is not the least bit testing on the perchance possibility that we not pronounce each syllable correctly. And we know that because the person he had introduced his name had a speech impediment. And we're specifically told he had a speech impediment immediately before Yahweh explains how to pronounce his name. So God is as clearly as words allow, and said, I'm not going to get all up in a tizzy fit if you don't pronounce it correctly. But by God, I want you to use it. This is my name.
The guy I used to work for didn't speak very good English. He had a very thick accent, but he'd always call me James. That was the best he could get to James. But at least he was trying to pronounce my name.
Yes. And Yahweh's name is Yahweh. He wants you to know it. He wants you to use it. And it's as simple as this. If you do not know Yahweh's name, if you're not using his name, if you're not calling him by name, then you do not know him. And if you do not know him, you are not part of his covenant. And if you're not part of his covenant, you are not welcome into heaven. God cares deeply about his name and is deeply offended when we replace his name with Jesus or Christ or Allah or Hashem or Adonai or Lord or any of that kind of stuff. He's deeply offended. He's the creator of the universe. He gave us his name 7,000 times. And he's offering us the opportunity to live forever with him in his home as his children. The least we can do is call him by name.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that was a big interruption on the name.
That's
but
okay.
It is a really big deal.
I'm going to interrupt interrupt myself here. One of the other things that is struck me is when I finally learned about the letters, the pictographs, that what a crime that is to reduce the language to other symbols that don't represent him the way the pictographs do.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, we just were talking about Marshall word pictures, and nothing what a more beautiful word picture than a hand reaching down from heaven, from above, to lift up and two people standing up surrounding a child. I mean, my gosh, if you can't get the picture of what he's all about from that, so why would you change that?
Right. So that what Kirk is saying here is that Yod He Wah He, reading from right to left, is a hand with the upper arm and a forehand. The upper arm is reaching down. The forearm is reaching out with an open hand. Mm-hmm. And an open hand does not hit. An open hand is not something that's fearful. An open hand is there to welcome and to grasp hold of. And it's God's hand reaching down and out to us like a parent would reach down and out to a child. And the two people who are the children of the covenant, representing Abraham and Sarah, are both standing up, reaching up to God. In other words, they've taken advantage of God's outstretched hand, and they're reaching up to God. Hey is the name of the letter. Hey means to pay attention. So they're observant individuals standing up, engaged, walking to God, which means they're not bowed down, they're not worshiping God, they're grasping hold of Him just like a child would rely on the outstretched hand of a parent to protect them, to lead them, to show them that they're loved, to keep them close. It is a marvelous picture, and the only other letter in between there is the tent peg, which is the Hebrew word wah, which means to add to join together, to increase. And the tent peg, of course,
strengthen the family.
Right, was the means to secure and enlarge a family home. It is it's a beautiful name, and it conveys so much in the original Hebrew alphabet that it is a shame that so few people know it. Yes.
Yeah. So we were at. He will come from a distant country in a distant time. Now this is Solomon.
Do you know why? Do you know why, Kirk? God is saying that this individual, this Nachri, is going to come from a different country at a different time, speaking a different language, and he is specifically not part of Israel. Therefore, he's not Jewish. Why do you think God said that?
Well, number one, they were all there. There's a whole bunch of things going on in my mind. Solomon's talking to people who is a unified Israel. They're all there. And even the idea of somebody saying come home when everybody's home has no relevance to these people.
Correct.
And,
so he's speaking of a future time. Right, future time.
So we know it's prophetic.
But God has always said, don't listen to somebody that's not Israel. That would be
that's my next point. He's saying,
so why is he telling them? Why is he telling them to listen to this goyim of a different land? What's the reason for that? There is a very, very important reason. Has nothing to do with the individual.
No. It has, number one, it's a couple of things come to mind. It's embarrassing that they won't listen and someone else would.
Well, that's true.
Outside of the family to
that's
find
kind of
somebody,
a byproduct, kind of a byproduct of it, yes. I'll share what the primary reason is. The primary reason is Yahowah specifically blinded Yisrael.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
And the reason he specifically blinded Yisrael, he says, you're not going to understand the Torah and the prophets. I'm going to blind you to it. And the reason was that he recognized how they had become religious, how they were inventing religions, how they were twisting what he said. And if they understood the prophets, if they understood his message and went from that point to twist it. For example, Paul, the entire religion of Christianity is based on taking something Yahweh said, misappropriating it, misquoting it, and misconstruing it. And it created credibility for what is really nothing but verbal diarrhea. And the Jews, being exceedingly bright and very manipulative, would have created a compelling religion that, using Yahweh's name, that would have sullied Yahweh's name, and that would have been exceedingly difficult to explain away. Rabbinic Judaism is so stupid. It is so ridiculously false and counterproductive. And because they don't use Yahweh's name and they don't pay any attention to the Torah, but instead the Talmud, it is actually quite easy to create a distinction for a Yisraelite today to say you need to disassociate from these rabbis. What they're saying is absurd, it is counterproductive, it is ridiculous, it is inconsistent with Yahweh, whose name they don't even use, And this is the truth that God himself revealed to you. And that is even somebody as dim-witted as I am can make that distinction. But if I was going against people who really knew the Torah and they knew Yahweh's name and they had not been blinded to this, that distinction would be so far beyond my capacity. Even with Yahweh's inspiration, I would be way too helplessly outgunned. I could say, well, this is the truth, but now for me to make the distinction between that and falsehood, you'd lose 99% of the audience in the process. And God specifically dumbed his people down so they wouldn't get it. Mm-hmm. So he is now in a position where for 2,000 years he looked for a Yehudim that would be able to represent his message, found none, and said, all right, I'm going to take this person in a different country at a different time, speaking a different language, mm-hmm. and he's going to convey my message to you.
Mm-hmm. Well, Yehudim also consider that Yehudim, being the more brilliant of the peoples on the earth, at least for the most part, is
they are on average. They are on average.
Without any on average. And they had something that Satan did not have. They have creativity.
Yes, they did.
They could twist the heck out. They can twist the heck out of this program.
And they did.
I mean, not the program, but the Torah.
They did.
Do. And where Satan can't do that because he couldn't come up with it. He has to twist because he can't counterfeit. He can't come up with a whole new plan. And that's even more so. You got to watch out for. But
God
would
not care if you came up with a plan that was entirely different from his. You didn't twist his. You didn't usurp his credibility. That God really doesn't care what you do. You just don't have. But if you're usurping his credibility, if you're twisting his message to mislead, which is the basis of Akiba's rabbinic Judaism or Paul's Christianity, that's a very serious offense.
So, that makes you have to be awfully honored when you said that they don't understand it and we have the option to study and can understand it. I mean, that's kind of freaky. Yes. I mean, to me personally, I just go.
Keep in mind that the overwhelming majority of those who are part of the covenant family have done the DNA test, and they are Jewish. The majority of those, the overwhelming majority of those who are part of the covenant family actually are Yehudim. I did the test and I've got 0. Yeah, that's pretty rare to have 0.
I haven't done it, but I would suspect I'm 0. But I'll check it out one of these days. I'm gonna have to do that one day.
Yep,
let me go back to real quickly because this is a lot of meat on the bone, and I know we're diverting from the original thing, but this is I think
this is our calling. This is actually Yahweh's calling for his people. We're just a tool that he's using.
While we're doing the show, while you're doing the show, absolutely, and JB.
That's why we're
rewriting. You will come from a different country. Yes, you will come from a different country and in a distant time for the express purpose of being a witness and providing answers regarding your surprisingly important name. The influence of your hand, along with the power and passionate ruler who is prepared to lead, and the productive ram who shepherds the flock, and that is Zoroah, whom you have extended. Now, when I read that, of course, there's 3 Zoroahs, and we're talking about Dode as the shepherd of the flock here. And no one has brought more to the table about Dode than what we've been doing in the last 2.5 years.
Boy, isn't that true?
I mean, because we talked about it both privately and on mic all the time.
And we're still just scratching the surface. Dode is the most brilliant orator in the history of humankind. He is the exemplar of the Torah. He is the antidote to religion. He is the Son of God. He is the anointed Messiah. He's the King of Kings. He's the one that's coming back with Israel. He's going to be the eternal shepherd. He is going to be in charge of forever. God never works alone. He always works through people. there's only one person that he chose for all of this, and it is Dode. And for good reason. Man is amazing, and he's real. He's flawed. He's passionate. He's creative. He's stunningly intellectual, and he loves to share what he knows. He's a man after God's heart. He represents the things that God loves. I've called him a lovable rogue, which is the great characters of plays and movies throughout history are lovable rogues. And I know that bothers some people to hear that term. But Dode is a very flawed guy, but exceedingly rational, exceedingly brilliant, exceedingly articulate, understands, but doesn't just understand. He's devoted to sharing what he knows. And God chose this man as the exemplar, as somebody we could follow, as somebody we could learn for somebody under whose protective care and leadership we could be shepherded as sheep. It's really cool. I think, personally, I wouldn't want the job that Yahweh has called and given to Dode. There's a lot of things I would like less than having a job. I mean, I'm glad that he has it. I don't have it. If Yahweh said you're not going to do this job, or a lot of people are going to be misled, I'd say, okay, well, we're going to do this job, and you're everything, and good luck working with a flawed implement. You made a really lousy choice. We'll go with it for the sake of the program. But Dode's not that kind of guy. Dode is, he's just in every possible way bigger than life. Yeah. And he is willing when it comes to protecting God's people. I'm anti-violence. I've said it a zillion times. Do not use anything I've ever written to commit a violent act. You've only got one opportunity to commit a violent act and be right, and it's so rare that if you see someone who is particularly a family member who is in imminent danger of being badly hurt by someone, you have the right to use violence to stop that person. And Dode was the one who protected Yahweh's family.
He protected Israel.
And he began with it as an 8-year-old with a single stone.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
So, yeah, he was exceedingly effective at protecting Yah's people. And his life, too, is a harbinger of what is to come because he had one adversary.
Mm-hmm.
The greatest adversary man would ever know, Shaul.
Yeah. Shaul.
And every aspect of his battle with King Shaul is manifest with the battle against Christianity and what Christianity, through Paul, Shaul, has done to God's people.
Do you remember, I don't know whether you had already bridged that gap a lot prior to that, but I remember I had the opportunity to watch you translate that time, and this is what you were covering. You were doing, this was exactly it. It stuck in my brain for a long time thereafter because I hadn't put it down concisely to, this is Paul against Dode.
Yeah, I remember that. We had the get-together while I was still in Florida. We had a number of covenant members come in, and everybody wanted the same thing. And I'd say, oh, come on, you really don't want that. And what you're going to find out is the way that I do this is just so systematic that you're going to find it to be boring as all get out because I am just really methodical about it. And so we spent hours and hours, and I said, okay, here's the Hebrew. This is how I go about it. We went through each word. We went through the stems. We went through the conjugations. We went through the moods. We went through the various options. We went to the hardest passages where you're saying, all right, the pronouns here are shifting. So what does it tell us about who this individual is? And what are the of the options? This word might have 5 different meanings. Which of those meanings could be legitimately applied to this? And and then once we put it all together, then the next step was, well, what can we learn from it? What's the lesson in these statements? Because that's the real payoff. What are the insights we can glean that are applicable to our life? And so we went through that each day for hours on end, and rather than everybody being put to sleep with how methodical the process is, I think there was a tremendous excitement that this is how we go about doing it, and what you can glean from it.
Yeah, it was cool, but it was kind of where he kind of kicked off. And so let me go back real quickly. When he arrives on the scene and chooses to pursue this, and now we're talking about the Nachri, then he will help interested parties reconcile their relationship by providing those who exercise good judgment with the information and justification needed to make a correct, reasoned decision regarding his family or familial relationship. When you hear it out of heaven, coming from the atmosphere. Now, this is, you have to think here. Here's Solomon talking strangely.
3,000 years ago.
3,000 years ago. When you hear it out of heaven, coming from the atmosphere.
After Yahweh was already told them in the Torah, I'm not speaking directly to them again. They asked me not to do it. I'm not speaking to them directly again. So they know that's not going to happen, but this voice is coming out of the atmosphere, out of the clouds, if you will. How is that going to happen?
But this is the Nachri, too, he's talking about. So you're supposed to listen to a Nachri who is a Gentile talking out of the sky, and they must have gone, wow, man, this is like, I think he's been drinking on this too much sauce.
Yeah, and keep in imagine, what is this occasion? This occasion is
Temple.
Solomon has taken everything that his father has acquired. His father bought the Temple Mount, prepared the Temple Mount, bought in all of the raw materials, laid the cornerstone for Yahweh's house, and now Solomon has completed it. And he gathered all of Israel together for the single most important moment in the history of the nation of God. In fact, I don't think there's another moment in the history of God's people that is as important as that very moment. They were home. Yahweh's home was built. It was glistening in the background. They were basking in the afterglow of having been created as a nation and protected by Dode. And at this point, Solomon was a very effective and brilliant witness. And it was at this moment that you say, oh, by the way, this is what's going to happen. And it must have been so overwhelming for them to hear it.
Well, it also points out that this is end-time stuff. If you were ever concerned that this wasn't it, friend, this is it. He's talking about the last hurrah. You come home, and they ain't even left yet. So, so we know where it is. We know what it's going to be. And he's speaking a foreign language, so that means they have to be in a foreign land.
Yes.
And so, you can draw as many conclusions as you want, but if we can proceed, when you hear it out of heaven coming from the atmosphere within the location where you live, then engage and act accordingly, doing everything which is to show the way. The observant foreigner from a different ethnicity and geographic location who understands has invited you to read that's interesting, it's all in book form, for the express purpose of being a witness who provides answers such that all the people of the earth have an opportunity, will have a genuine and ongoing opportunity to become familiar with Yada. To know, acknowledge, accept, and understand your name, your Shem. Coming to respect and revere you, because we don't worship you, we don't obey the Lord. Coming to respect and revere you simultaneously along with your people, Yisrael. And also, just to conclude, and also so that they may know, once again, Yada mentioned again, that truthfully, your family and his house, which to reveal the correct path to walk, to give life meaning that I have built for the family, are designated and called Kara, from the word Kara, called out, by your name. That's everything that is the mainstream of what your book's about, is what you've talked about. It's what we've all joined in and studied, confirmed. I can go upstairs and find 10,000 sheets of paper where I have translated and retranslated some of it not well in the beginning, but thrown about half of it away, but I've probably still got thousands of pages in there upstairs in boxes where I went over and redid everything you did, saying, where did you get that? And if I had to say that to someone, could I prove it? And that was my only intent. It wasn't to for any other reason. I wanted to know, and I wanted to make sure that when I speak, it is my also understanding of what I'm reading. Because you're a better writer, I don't care to rewrite it. That's not my deal. But if I'm going to quote it, I darn sure want to know exactly that I'm not lying to anybody or confused about what it says and can prove it.
And,
so
and one of the things, there's an implication in what you said there that I think is exceedingly important for listeners to appreciate. There's only one way that God could say, I want you to listen to everything this person says, and I want you to act accordingly based upon what this person has written. There's only one way that God can say that, and that is if the person has said and written precisely what God has said and written. So it's only by accurately translating what God has said and conveying his message as clearly as is possible, as completely as possible, and then describing about the implications of those insights, that God could make that statement, because there is no man who is worth listening to if he's giving his own opinion. No one. God's not going to tell his people to listen to any guy or gal, no matter who they are or what they have done, that is sharing their opinion. So this Nachri has to be fixated, focused entirely on exposing the covenant, exposing the teachings of the Torah, explaining the Moed Mikre, explaining the importance and the pronunciation of Yahweh's name, telling us as much as we can possibly glean about Dod, explaining the prophetic consequences of time as it plays out through the end days, is devoted to understanding and sharing that God is trying to reconcile his relationship with Yisrael and Yehudah, explain the timeline that this is all transpiring in, so we know where we are in the final act of this wonderful story. It has to incorporate all of that. It has to be grounded in the Hebrew, but yet speak in the lingua franca of not only the world, but the language best understood by the most Jews in the world.
Yeah.
So that's the reason that God isn't telling you, listen to this person because he's got some really swell opinions. No. Listen because this person is focused on translating, my testimony and sharing it as accurately as they can. And it's not, God's not saying it's perfect. It's just like Moshe and the perfect pronunciation of the name. No.
Fair enough.
But it's close enough, consistent enough to effectively call Yisrael home. Back to the promised land, back to Yahweh, back to the covenant, back to the Torah, through the Mikre. And there's a lot of ingredients that make this thing all work. It is you have to understand the nature of the one and only covenant and the terms and conditions of that covenant, so you understand what God is asking and what he's offering in return. You have to understand how the Moed Mikre, the invitations to meet with God, integrate and enable the benefits of the covenant. It's essential to understand that the primary purpose of the Torah is not a set of laws, but instead teaching and guidance. You know, even knowing the three Zeroah is essential to this message. Zeroah is used in the context of this introduction. And there are three Zeroah. There's the shepherd that was Moshe, the one that led the sheep to freedom, liberated, drew them out of the clutches of religious and political and economic and military oppression. He is the first Zeroah. The ultimate Zeroah, the protective shepherd that would protect and unify God's sheep and guide them through all eternity, is Dowd. And the sacrificial lamb, Zeroah, is Yosha. He's the Passover
Open
lamb.
the door.
Right.
Yes.
And so you to effectively call the people home, you have to know all this stuff. One of the greatest negative consequences of Christianity isn't the fact that Paul twisted Yahweh's testimony so that he lured billions of Gentiles to their death.
Billions.
That's bad. That's not the worst. The fact that Paul became unbelievably anti-Semitic, and through replacement theology and through his anti-Semitism, managed to create a religion that would harass God's people to a greater extent and for a longer time than anything man has ever conceived. That's really bad. The single greatest tragedy of Pauline Christianity is the fact that Paul so misconstrued the nature of Yosha, who was the Passover lamb. He said everything about him other than the Passover lamb. He wrongly called him the Messiah, which Jews know that's not true. He came up with a different name for him, Iusu Christu. The Jews knew that wasn't true. He called him the Son of God. The Jews knew that wasn't true. And so, because they were so repulsed by what Paul made popular in terms of the lies about him, they rejected him entirely. And you can't reject him entirely because he's the Passover lamb.
No.
There is no doorway into heaven. There's no eternal life if you don't capitalize on the Pesach El. And Paul's corruption of everything that Yosha represented was so great that Jews universally were repulsed by the dead God on a stick. And in so doing, they missed the fact that while he was not the Messiah, while he was not the Son of God, he was the Passover lamb. And he fulfilled Passover. And then Yahweh with his soul fulfilled matzah, unyeasted bread. And then collectively the spirit and the soul were reunited on Bikurim to celebrate being born into Yahweh's family, so that on Shabuah, also in year 4000 we could be enriched and empowered, so that ultimately Yahweh in year 6000 would be able to reconcile his relationship with his people, and that collectively would camp out on this earth for 1,000 years thereafter, celebrating Sukkah and the Shabbat. And how collectively this, like we're talking about the things that were transpiring in Eden, the whole story is being told about the conditions that existed in Eden, because that 1,000-year celebration of the Shabbat and Sukkah, of camping out together, is God working with Dowd to bring us right back to Eden. And so there is just so much to share with Yahweh's people, that it is a big project, and it is a big project. Part of this project, you don't just have to repudiate Judaism, but you have to repudiate both Islam and Christianity to be effective as the Necri.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's Islam that's trying to wipe them off the face of the earth. Yeah. And it's Christianity that has deprived them of this exceedingly valuable truth.
Speaking of that,
Lamb, and the Dowd is the Messiah. They're waiting for a Messiah. They don't even know his name, and yet it's Dowd.
Yeah, 3 times.
Yeah, 3 times.
Let me finish it off with this.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
No.
I'm really good. I'm really good at interrupting.
I know.
I'm good at something.
Well,
it's always good to be good at something.
I've been doing this with you and
I
JD
know. I'm so passionate about it. It drives everybody crazy.
I think it's right. But here was the other thing that shoe that dropped, and it reminded me about it's unequivocal that Dowd's the king, he's the Messiah, and he's the number one son. I mean, no question about that. And it further exposed Pauline Christianity and the theft that they made of all things Dowd and put it on their fake Jesus. And I say that it's not disparaging to Yahusha. He didn't want it. He didn't claim it.
Yes.
It ain't him. He knew he worked in his father's work, and he knew that. So that's not so that's exactly what happened. But here's the one verse that this came from a discussion with Jackie and Jeff, where we were putting together things that we thought would resonate with Christians. I've given up any hope. But Jackie was so kind to put these together. And here's the 89th Psalm 33, 34, and 35. And if you have any doubts about Dowd, about God lying about anything or changing his mind, here's what he said.
Yeah.
He says, accordingly, my unwavering love, my enduring devotion, my unmitigated affection and genuine mercy, I will never remove from him, because I will never communicate something which is not true, nor will I ever contradict my steadfast commitment to truth. I will never dishonor, nor will I poke holes in my covenant, nor will I ever alter or change, Paul, that which has gone forth from my lips. That's Shafah, emanating from his inner being. He spoke it out. There is only one to whom I affirm the truth of having made a promise by my set-apart nature. If not to Dowd, I will be proven a liar. So if you want to challenge him, go ahead. But I'm sorry.
One. Only one. All one. In all of human history, only one. And God says, not only is there only one, if that isn't a truthful statement, there's only one that I've done all this for, then I'm a liar.
Yeah.
Right? Does God say that any other place?
No, sir.
No. It's Dowd. Everything. Everything you ever need to know, you can learn through Dowd. Between the Mashal and the Mizmor, he is so inspiring, so enlightening, but his life exemplifies what Yahweh wants most. He picked this one young boy, 8 years old, because he exemplifies what Yahweh loves. God's not looking for us to be perfect. He's not looking for us to be good. He wants us to strive to be right. He wants us to have courage. He wants us to have compassion. He wants us to be rational. He wants us to get up in the morning and study his Torah. He wants us to protect his people. He wants us to share his message. We would be so wise, Kirk, if we were to take the time to appreciate what it was about this man that caused God to say, I'm going to call him beloved.
Yeah.
I'm going to
That's a heck of a name.
I'm going to rule eternity through him. He is the shepherd of my people. I am his father. He is my son. Just think of that. Or Dod's name is second only to Yahweh's name in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. For God to say, all right, when I come back to exist with man here on earth for 1,000 years, I'm coming back with Dod. And not only am I coming back with him, he's going to be as brilliant as the sun. I mean, these are extraordinary things. Amazingly important promises. And I just keep on saying over and over again, is it behooves us as people to take the time to appreciate what is it about this man that is different than the rest of us. He was brilliant. He was a student of the Torah. He was committed to the relationship. He had compassion. He had courage. He had wonderful leadership skills. Mm-hmm. He was an amazingly articulate individual. He was a marvelously talented writer. He loved to share what he was learning. He was a brilliant student, an equally good teacher. Those are all things that God must really like.
Yeah.
There's no comment of, well, he donated a cathedral in my name.
He built the 16th chapel.
No. Don't recall that being in the midst.
No.
He was so wonderful they called him saint. Nope. He prayed without ceasing. Nope. Oh, he was so devoted to the relationship, he killed himself, sacrificing himself for the people. No. He raised $1 billion for the cause. No. These are not the things that impress God.
Not the church.
Yeah. Oh, he was a powerful leader with marvelous credentials. No, he was an 8-year-old boy. He was the last born of the family. He was the one that the dad didn't even want to bother to bring to the party. Obviously ashamed of him.
Wow.
And God says, that's the one. And then he goes on and says, listen, what man values is not what I value. This is the one that I have chosen. So you need to know that everything that man values this is important. It's not what God values. So what was it about this man that made him different than other men ought to be one of the most important questions we as humans can possibly ask, because this is the person God loved most. He accomplished most through. And so if we want to please God, if we want God to be able to use us effectively, there's nothing we can do that's more important than appreciating what this man learned, what this man shared, what this man represented, why this man was so important to God. And so, yes, Dod is essentially important. One of the things you did not share, and I'm glad you didn't, and we've done it already, I think, on 2 programs, is that Yahowah actually devotes more than a full chapter to our mission. The 11th chapter in Yahowah, and much of what follows in the subsequent chapters of Yahowah, is specifically devoted to our mission. And in it, God says, yes, and the implement I'm going to use, he uses the term choder. The implement I'm going to use is insignificant stem. This is a meaningless, from the human perspective, this is a meaningless implement. But I'm going to wield that implement by having the Spirit provide all of these things for this individual so that that individual is capable of composing this nesh, this sign that I want to lift up to call my people home. And he's very clear that the words that are going to be on that sign are dodes.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot to what Yah was trying to accomplish, how he's trying to accomplish it, why he chose to work through a flawed and insignificant implement, and why it's so important to know what to emphasize: the covenant, the Torah, the Mikre, Dode, his timeline, the nature of just the Hebrew language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And to effectively communicate God's nature, where you make it emphatically clear that God is anti-religious, he's anti-political, he's anti-militaristic. He is not impressed with anybody's credentials. And he has a tremendous sense of humor. He's a wonderful teacher. He's eminently approachable, comfortable to be around. His expectations for us are actually exceedingly low.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, thank goodness. Yeah, thank goodness. Dode's a wonderful example. Yeah, Dode's a wonderful example. We're not going to be as brilliant as Dode. We're not going to be as articulate as Dode. We're not going to be as courageous as Dode. But Dode was a flawed guy, and so we can follow in his footsteps. We can do a lot that he taught us to do, and we're never going to feel inadequate when we're studying the life and the words of Dode. Yes. So, Dode's goal is not to make us feel inadequate with God. His goal is just to feel comfortable with God. You know, Dode was only uncomfortable with God for a very short time in his life. And you know, keep in mind that Dode started when he was 8 years old. You and I started. I started in my 40s with this, and been doing it for 20 years. And you know, I'm obviously 20 years past my 40s now. Don't tell anyone.
No.
But Dode starting at 8, I think he did burn out at the end. I mean, it was more of a job, more challenging than he could endure for all of his life, and so he was exceedingly effective early, and not so much later in life. Moshe was exactly the opposite. You can study times where Dode was clearly estranged from God, and yet God was very clear with him. He's still my guy. I still love him. We're still coming back with him. But we know that when we're less than perfect, when we have periods where we're not as effective and not as focused as perhaps we should be, God's pretty understanding of that. And
yes.
You know, at one point, Dode is saying, you know, I did a really lousy job here, God. I built this marvelous house for myself with all of the things that you have given me, and I haven't built a house for you. I'm really feeling guilty here. You know, and God said, even once during all of the time that I was with the children of Israel, did you ever hear me once say, I want you to build a house for me?
Yeah.
You know, I'm out here in this tent. I'm not pretentious. That's fine with me. I didn't ask for that. You know, finally he did say, I want you to build this house for me in this place, because it was a metaphor for God creating his covenant family and his home in the heart of the promised land, and everything that represents. And so, he tangibly built it, and that's when you're reading the story of the Nakri. It's the dedication of Yahweh's house. And by the way, it does not say temple.
No.
It's a bayeth. It's a house for the family. Yeah, it's bayeth.
That's correct. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll pick up where we left off and explaining what God had to say to man. Yeah. This time next week. Sometime I really do want to go and share the most recent translations of Shabbat. Because
you're going to send me something so I can read up on it?
Oh, yeah. It's so much more powerful and indicting and precise and insightful than what we had previously seen. So anyway, I've now finished Volume 3. I think there's 2 or 3 more chapters that the edit team is still working on that will get straightened away, and it'll be published too. And that will add those 3, and we'll be finished then with what was Questioning Paul. I think it went from 1,200 pages to 2,000 pages, but now
an edit.
Busy. Yeah, it was just a simple edit. And now we're about the process of adding Volume 4 of Questioning Paul, which is going to be some of the best insights that along the way, the history of translation, Paul's influence on the Christian New Testament, particularly as we analyzed Matthew and the fraud that was Matthew and how it became anti-Semitic. We'll definitely present the 89th Mizmor so that it shows not only Yahweh's devotion to Dode and exposes the fraud that is replacement theology, but in the 89th Mizmor, Paul is called both the father of lies and the son of evil. So it's important to tell that story. And I'll probably bring in the analysis that we did on Paul's first public address, where we just absolutely tore it to ribbons in a previous program. So we'll bring in those things each as a chapter of Volume 4 that just help to flesh out the entire story of why you ought not trust the Christian New Testament beyond just condemning Paul. The first chapter of it happens to be on the transition from Moab, which is this blend of Pauline Christianity and political correctness, and I explain it by criticizing Paul's most celebrated prose, the love chapter of 1 Corinthians 13. Yeah, so what I did is I'm opening Volume 4 of Questioning Paul with the only passage that is universally accepted as Paul's most magnificent prose, and I'm showing you that demonstrating that every word of it's a lie. That there is absolutely no aspect of it that is true. No, there's one aspect of it where Paul says, if then I am nothing. And I say, okay, well, he got that right. but other than that, admission that I am nothing, he ain't getting anything right.
Here.
And so if you could take the one thing that is the most revered of what he had to say and absolutely leave the reader convinced of, oh, my God, you're right. None of this is true. It was a good place to start. And I think very quickly into this, Kirk, though, I've got to get into the 89th Mizmor and bring it into Questioning Paul, because it establishes absolutely irrefutable proof that the Son of God, the Messiah, the King of Kings, the one who is returning, all of the accolades that were falsely given to Iusu Christou, Jesus Christ, belong to Dode. And if you understand that, you've ripped the heart out of Pauline Christianity. And the 89th Mizmor does that, in addition to presenting Paul as the father of lies and the son of evil. And father of lies and son of evil, those are not good names. You know, a lot of good names in the Torah. Those are not good names.
Those aren't names I want to be called.
No. Plague of death, bad. Father of lies, son of evil.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this is
little.
And matter of fact, when your life is so bad that you've been given naming rights to hell, and hell is named after you, that's really bad too. But, you know, for those that don't know, but Shaul, which was his given name, and Sheol are written identically in Hebrew. So Paul was given naming rights to hell. Cost him his soul, but hey, the place was named after him. There is no place named after James Craig, but there is one named after Paul. He's got that on us. All right. Well, folks, we'll be with you this time next week. I'm glad you got out of the deep freeze, JP. Take care. Stay safe.
We mostly stayed at home and played in the snow with the baby.
Since you're in the education business and schools are a priority, are you prioritized for the COVID vaccine?
I haven't even looked into it.
Okay.
That's one of those, they rush that to the market way too fast for my comfort.
Okay. Well, you know, at this point, you now have about 30 million COVID vaccines given worldwide, and 4 million of them in Israel, where they have tracked every single individual. And in Israel, of those who've had the Pfizer vaccine, which is the one that they're distributing in Israel, and have had the two shots, the booster, the original shot and the booster of Pfizer, had gone 2 weeks after the booster, that not a single person has died of COVID or has died of the vaccine or of COVID that's had the two shots. And virtually no one has gotten sick to the point they had to be hospitalized. And that it has flat out taken the sting out of COVID. You know, in Israel,
I kind of got the natural vaccine. I actually got COVID, so.
Oh, you actually got it?
About 4 weeks ago, Patty had it, and then it hurt her way harder than it hit me, but like she was out for like 3 days. She could hardly get up, do anything.
Oh, wow.
Me, I was just mild. Wow. To me, it was more almost like a bad flu. Yeah, I've had worse, but yeah. Yeah, we were quarantined for 3 weeks, and then, because I couldn't go back to work for it. So, we had it through here, so.
Yeah, one of the challenges is that while you can have it, it doesn't do anything to you, or it could be like Patty, where it makes you really sick. But there are so many legacy issues with COVID that if there was ever something worth getting a vaccine for, it's this bug because of the legacy implications of it. You're young and you're healthy, and you don't have any of the pre-existing conditions that it normally preys on. But boy, they appear to have done a really fine job with this vaccine in terms of their ability to be 97% effective and virtually 100% effective in terms of serious consequences.
But mine was more about not giving it to Terry or anyone in that care center. You know, so it's for that reason alone I chose to do it, and I've had both.
And the booster made you really sick, didn't it, for several days?
Well, it made me for about 48 hours. I had real flu-like symptoms with shakes and shivers and everything, and I knew what was going on because they warned me this could happen. I basically only took Advil, not Advil, but Well, anyway, I took some type of aspirin thing, and it was fine. I lived through it, and I toughened up, and that's okay. So, but I didn't really feel I was going to die, but I sure felt like hell for about 2 days. But I'm okay now.
The mortality numbers on COVID are still exceedingly low for anything that's ever been labeled a pandemic, and it's they're high because the thing is so dadgum contagious. And of course, one of the big concerns are there's 2 strains now, where those strains are not only considerably more contagious, but the variations, the modifications of the virus have made it such that those modifications were specifically created to make it difficult for the body's defense mechanisms to be able to respond to it. So the African strain is become a real problem because the modification is specifically designed to thwart the body's natural responses to reject it. Now, what's interesting about these the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines, which are messenger RNA vaccines, is that those vaccines, because they're written code, can be very quickly modified specifically for new variants. And so both are, I think one of them, Moderna, has already been modified, and they're in the process of modifying the Pfizer, and they'll give a third booster if the test shows that it is not quite as effective for the African strain. So it is
we have a California strain too now. So they say a booster will do that, take care of that one as well. Yeah. I'm hoping.
So the California strain deprives people of their liberty and their livelihood?
No, that's another strain.
Is that where it attacks? Is it attacks liberty and livelihood?
It basically shut down.
No, that's where the government taking advantage of the strain comes in.
Okay. Yeah, well, I was just trying to think what would be unique about a California strain. And
they have a new one.
Shut down the economy and tell people they can't work. That would be pretty obvious, right?
Yeah.
But keep in mind that this idea that this is going away is zero, because we will never get 60% of Americans vaccinated, and you're not going to get 60% of Europeans vaccinated because there's too many conspiracy nutcases out there that are afraid of vaccines. Like, for example, we have vaccine tourism here in the U.S. Virgin Islands, where you can come in without an appointment, show up at any one of the clinics giving the vaccine, and doesn't matter what your age is, doesn't matter what your occupation is, doesn't matter if you have health insurance, doesn't matter anything, and within 5 minutes of the time that you show up there, they're giving you a vaccine. And it only costs now, for most places in the U.S., about $150 round trip to fly in and out here. People are coming in here. The people I had dinner with last night flew in just to get the vaccine.
Really?
And the reason is because the majority of people who live in the Crucians that live on this island don't want the vaccine because the culture has somehow caused them to believe that COVID was a plot by Bill Gates of Microsoft, and the vaccine is a tracking mechanism by the U.S. government. I mean, it's just absurd. But nonetheless, they don't want to take it. So we're swimming in vaccine. You're not taking it away from anybody. We're just swimming in it. And so we do have economic vaccine tourism here on the U.S. Virgin Islands. But it ultimately is going to be your ability for freedom. If you don't have the vaccine, you're not going to be able to travel. But
no, you can't get on a plane. I have to keep my card. I have a card now, so I go.
Right. Yeah, you have to show that you've been vaccinated. Otherwise, you're not. You're going to be continually restricted. But the point I was going to make is that in the Muslim world, you aren't even going to get 20% of the people vaccinated. Mm-hmm. And in Africa, it'd be a miracle in Africa to get 20% of the people vaccinated in Africa. So you're never going to get immunity from this thing, and it will continue to evolve and mutate. And as it evolves and mutates, it's becoming a more egregious virus. And it's not going away, and governments have turned this thing into the ultimate control mechanism where the world is never going to return to what it was. And ultimately, because of the consequence, like we've been having all these announcements here recently, that the cost of T-bills is rising and rising appreciably at a faster rate than ever. And it's happening worldwide because we have so destroyed the value of our currency by what is essentially $10 trillion just in America fighting the consequence of us shutting down the economy. You know, Trump had a $4 billion COVID package, then a $1 billion COVID package, and now a $2 trillion COVID package. And then you have all the added unemployment insurance and all the diminished taxation of putting people out of work. It's about $10 trillion. And now the interest rate is beginning to blossom on that. And so we're going to have a $500 billion a year just in added interest because of this. And because now the government has to borrow so much money, there's no longer money available for corporations to borrow, which means they're not going to be able to create jobs. And then you've got an administration that wants to limit business growth through the Kyoto Accords and going back into the Paris Accords, who wants to inflict a minimum wage of $15 so that it becomes harder and harder to hire and people, and to impose more and more restrictions that make it more and more difficult for business and make the cost of borrowing money even more difficult. There is no way out. And so what's going to happen is there's going to be an economic reset. The dollar is going to collapse. And there's going to be a new currency that the world banking interests and political interests will get people to accept, because if you accept it, there will be a conversion of your dollars into this new currency along with the total forgiveness of debt. And they're going to, they'll start with forgiving student loans, and then they'll be forgiving credit cards, and then they'll forgive mortgages, and they'll just gradually forgive debt. And you're going to say, well, then the only hedge for that is to be in gold or bitcoins or something of that nature. But look what FDR did. And that's what's going to happen again. They force you to give up those things at an undervalued rate. And so there's really no way to beat it, and that's where we're going. So it's not a pretty picture, and there's no way out of it. So the moral of the story is: do not trust your government, do not trust your political party, do not trust your religion, don't trust man. Men and women individually have the capacity to be good or bad. Men and women unified nationally, unified institutionally, are always bad. Always. And so don't trust human institutions, your nation, your patriotism, your military. Trust Yahweh. That is the message of the story. That is what we want everyone to understand, is if you trust and rely on Yahweh, you come to know him, come to respect him, you appreciate what he's offering, appreciate what he and are willing to accept what he is wants from us in return. You appreciate the nature of the covenant, participate in the mikra, understanding what they represent. Come to love the Torah guidance of Yahweh, learn from his prophetic declarations. You can come to trust and rely on our Heavenly Father and be protected from all of this. And if you don't, it's going to be exceedingly destructive.
Life is going to be tough,
Life is tough, and it's going to become
tougher.
Yeah, one of the things we have witnessed here, I've shared this with you, Kirk, is that because of the fact that people are so concerned about life in the contiguous United States, Black Lives Matter was very scary and continues to be scary for people. What happened on Capitol Hill with the opposite group, the Trumpites, very scary for people. The current media attacks, which are making it impossible for anyone to share what their position is politically unless it is exceedingly liberal, is very troubling for people. The government lockdowns on Corona, which had no beneficial effect and were unbelievably devastating and counterproductive, are very troubling for people. And so the U.S. Virgin Islands has become an escape, a place to go where you can get away from that. And we're witnessing this huge upswing of people here. So be careful. If
you're saying we should move down there.
I will tell you, this is a good place to. If you want to get away from it all, this is a good place to get away from it. No, Yahowah actually wants you to us. Well, if you are Yahud, if you're an Israelite, he is calling his people back to Israel. Now, whether or not that means that everyone that is a Israelite needs to move to Israel, or just to identify with Israel, or both, that's for us individually to resolve. As it relates for a goyim, and I could not live in Israel because what I do is not legal in Israel.
Shoot you.
No, well, it's beyond that. Listen, Muslims trying to come after me and kill me is something that God's protected me from, so they can't do that. But it's criminal in Israel. This program, what I say and what I write is illegal in Israel. So I cannot. That's why the NACRI has to be reaching out to Israelites from a different place, from a land far away, is because you can't do this in Israel. So I know God is not calling me to go back to Israel. And one of the things that you learn about these terms like NACRI and Towrah, while they are singular, God doesn't do anything for one person. Abraham was a singular guy, but all of that presentation on the covenant was for all Israel and for the Goyim who wish to be part of Israel. Mm-hmm. And so the same thing is true with the NACRI and the Towrah. Anybody that wants to live that life and to devote themselves to this message is welcome. The more the better. Mm-hmm. So if I know that I am not to go to Israel and yet identify with Israel and call Israel home, I am certain that there's others that don't need to go to Israel as well. And so, yes, this actually is an exceedingly wonderful place to write. It is. It's a very wonderful, accommodating place to write and to enjoy life, where you're just unencumbered by all of the threats and the lockdowns and all that sort of thing that permeate the rest of the world.
If you accept the covenant terms and you're not going to miss the true harvest, so would it be necessary for Yehudim to go back to Israel?
Yahweh is clearly calling his people home. But home is the covenant. Yes. Home is also Yisrael, and what Yisrael represent, individuals who engage and endure with God, who are freed by God. Yeah. But Yisrael is also a very real place.
Yes.
And so typically, when you're asked a question like that and all three apply, the answer is yes. And I do think
well, especially when the wars start, that's going to be where they'll be safe, because that's the place that Yahweh will be protecting.
Correct. The only place Yahweh is going to protect.
He hadn't made a stand, that'd be there.
Right.
And after that comes,
listen, if you become covenant, your life is protected no matter where you are.
That's true.
But as covenant in Israel, you will ultimately be able, I think, to make a bigger impact, because as it becomes more and more difficult and we move closer and closer to the time, there are going to be more and more Israelites in Israel who are going to embrace Yahweh's message, and Jews are going to have so many challenges on their plate. The last thing they're going to want to try to do is to imprison and silence a fellow Jew who is sharing the Torah. You know, and understand that as we go to a more violent situation surrounding Israel, with initially with the Muslims flooding in, and then after the Muslims, socialist, secular, humanists, communists trying to take over. Israel's become a war zone. The Haredi in Israel, the Orthodox Jews in Israel, don't fight. They're not part of the IDF. They are going to be despised by the 80% of Israel who is willing to defend the country. So their voice in the government, their voice among the people, is going to diminish considerably, where the ability to share the truth about the Torah in Yahweh's name is going to become the nation will be much more receptive to it, because the only people that would fight against it are the Haredi, the Orthodox Jews. And their voice is going to be hugely reduced as we move towards a time where Israel is really defending itself from annihilation. And they're going to turn to men and women wearing helmets, not rodents on their heads.
Sorry. You get a lot of emotions on this show.
Yes, you do. All right, my friends. Happy Shabbat to one and all. May Yah bless. Look forward to being with you all next week. And Kirk, I do think that was a very worthwhile endeavor into a place that helps to define Yahweh's mission, of which we are simply participants.
Thank you. I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah.
Thank you. JB.
Good night, JB. Good to have you back, bud.
Shalom. Oh, yeah.
Shabbat shalom.
Good to be back.
Shabbat shalom.